I start with another question because many people ask if greening of the facade, if it might help, or not help in reducing bird collisions. Because if you speak with architects, many architects say anything they do on the facade reduces the risk. So greening should be one of it. And unfortunately, we have very little evidence if this works for a reduction or not. It might even be that it increases the risk because it attracts birds. And if we have more bird activity around the facade, there may be more situations where birds crash into the panes. There might be situations if you have the green, maybe green constructions just in front of the glass panes. So the glass panes cannot be seen from a distance. It might even be help. But it might be completely different. We have not enough knowledge about this. So I wouldn't agree to say this reduce the possibility of bird collisions. Yeah, but to start with my topic, if you want to see how many birds collide with the building, you have many methodological difficulties. There is one that the collision marks on the glass panes are often inconspicuous and only visible at close range. There are unfortunately many collisions, especially in small birds, which do not left any markings on the panes. And the dead birds, they are removed quickly, if they are small birds, very quickly because of many predators or carcass eaters. We have, at least in Berlin, and I know it from publication in Britain and Switzerland, it's similar there. And days birds, quite often you find a bird which hit the glass, it's still alive. It might either caught by a predator quickly or move away. And as Wolfgang mentioned, we think that most of the birds which collide with windows really die. This is supported by a publication of Daniel Klemm, and he thinks after visiting different material in the States, at around 82 to 85 birds which collide with the window, they all also die. It's very difficult to do research on it because you should follow such a bird for a couple of days. But I would say roughly a bird which hit a glass pane is almost dead. So some bird species leave quite good visible imprints, especially larger birds like pigeons, which are also very common in cities, at least in Central Europe, woodpeckers, birds of prey. And but this is quite rare in small birds. It happens, but it's quite rare. And if you have a look to the glass panes, you see normally this white area. And sometimes you don't know if was it a bird, whatever it was. But if you see two lines like here, or even here, you can be sure it's a bird because these lines are the wings. And in almost all of these imprints, you see signs of the wings. And here you have a bird imprint. After some days of rain, you see it fades away. And if you see it in, say, 20 meters above the ground, it might be difficult to identify as a bird imprint. In sheltered places, these imprints can stay very long, for many, many months. We had a couple of imprints in Berlin in a long monitoring, which were visible after 15 months. These here might be visible after a couple of years if no rain touches the glass pane. The other thing you might see at the facade is a small feather. And if a bird hits the glass, it might be a feather from the head or from the breast, feathers from the breast area. These feathers, you could do it with maybe genetic or molecular techniques, but normally these are not really identifiable, with the exception of some birds like robin with the orange-red tracks of the feathers you can identify, but normally you only see it was a bird, quite likely a small bird. And even if it's further away, it might be difficult to identify as a feather, because sometimes spider webs or plant seeds can look very similar, especially after some rain, if it's not completely washed. This is a very special collision. You see one of these bird stickers working in the UV reflections, and this bird collided exactly where the sticker was. It definitely didn't recognize it as an obstacle, then it would have crashed maybe here against the window. If you have a bird which is still alive, you often find on the ground a dropping of the bird. So very often birds which collide, they set a dropping. And if you have a very strong crash, even this facial may splash on the window. You can have this area here is covered by the body, but you can have large flashes of facial on the glass. The carcasses of small birds are removed normally quickly. There are situations where you can see them for ages if nobody removes them, like this woodcock, it was in a train station. Also, this kingfisher was in the train station, and this lesser white throat, maybe, I don't know, was concolorless with the window, but normally they are taken by somebody within hours or at least one day. Inside cities, we also have the cleaning services, which can remove everything, especially in autumn. If you have leaves of trees, they clean the pedestrian walks. So it's also recommended in America. It's very time consuming, so we did it parts of the year. And what worked quite well is that we did almost 30 weeks of a year, and we put it mainly in the time of the end of July to end of November. It's dispersal time and autumn migration where involved. We also made some weeks during the spring migration. There might be places where spring migration is more pronounced. Experience also very active. So you also the city, it looks completely different. There's one suggestion from America to do it even more longer, 1.5 years, and to cover 2 autumn seasons. It would be very good, because bird migration can change due to the weather situation in each autumn a bit. Then if you do such a census, you have to better to inform the building owners for practical reasons, not to get arrested. What happened is I didn't inform one building owner And I will show you some photos to prepare facade pictures where you can do markings where you find any imprints or feathers. And the survey is carried out in two different ways. One is the scan of the glass panes. We find you have to do it twice a week. It means that you look with the binoculars, the glass facade to find imprints or feathers. Even you can search for droppings, and of course, always look for dead birds if you do this. But you have to take into account the different light situation at each facade, depending of the state of the sun and the sky coverage. You will make your own experience and realize what is the best time of the day and the best light to search for each facade. We say 2 times a week you should do it because one in the morning, one in the afternoon, maybe because some facades are better in the afternoon to see it. So each facade is once per week inspected. It's also good to know when there is a cleaning of the glass, because this cleans everything. And after cleaning of the glass, you often have a higher collision rate because the glass is more mirror-like or more transparent. And if possible or necessary, also try to check the glass from inside. And the second part is the search for bird corpses, which should be done additionally. It's quicker, much quicker, because you only have to go around the building and look to the ground to look for the birds. We recommend it twice a week, and within the peak migration period, which is in Berlin in October, it should be done more often, because the likelihood to find birds it's much higher. The time of the day depends on the situation. Morning would normally a good time. If light is involved, Wolfgang mentioned it attracts birds even on lower floors. It might, the research has to be done very, very early, even if it's dark, because if the first light arrives in Berlin, the first crows get active and they look to the panes and to the facades to get a good breakfast, and you have to be quicker than them. Yeah, then this is only some practical hints. To save time, I can go maybe quite quickly. Of course, you have to identify the birds. For the imprints, it's difficult, normally very difficult to identify them on species level. We recommend to try to get the size of the imprint. If the bird has wing spreads out, that might be possible. And even if you have it higher on the building, you might measure the size of the window, and with a good photograph you can measure the wingspan of the bird and maybe differentiate between wood pigeon and feral pigeon, for example. It's good to document everything with a photograph. You need a camera with manual focus for this, so just a mobile phone is normally not sufficient for this. Yeah, and you should do, if you have done such a survey, a good report with the documentation and summary, because it helps, at least in Germany, to go to the owner or even go to law to make a better situation, to bring some markings on the glass panes. You might recognize those bird collision monitorings are not simple, and they are not cheap, because a lot of effort is needed to do this. But so far there is no automatic recording of bird collisions with glass. Just some example. Here you have in a zoological garden, something like a tropical greenhouse. You have a lower floor where reflections might be the case because it's a dark background, but you have this transparent construction on the roof. And it was just a very short monitoring of 14 weeks. And you see here is a problem with a reflection of maybe some interesting bushes. So it also helps to know where to have the markings on the paints. But in this transparent tropical greenhouse situation, birds fly from everywhere. And this is another situation. It's in the Berlin city center. It's completely glass architecture. And what Wolfgang already said, where you have vegetation, even trees, there you have the bird collisions. So the biggest amount of bird collisions were found in front of these trees, especially the last tree, because if birds move in this row of trees from the last tree, they have the best option to see the reflecting tree in this facade of this higher building. So the most birds fly at about 10, 20 to 25 meters, depending on the size of the trees. Another situation is if you have a glass at the edge of the building, at the top here and over there. These are problematic situations. So if you carry out a survey, that's what I mentioned, do photographs or architecture pictures from the facade, have it in the field and just mark this is a place where the bird collided and just put a number. In your report, you have the same number, the documentation. Number 9 is something I don't know. This is just to show which species was involved. Also important to have such a view about the facades you was researching on. One thing to mention, we have one species which is not a native species. It's a Ferry Pigeon, sometimes quite common in cities, and these birds also collide with glass quite commonly, and they leave very visible imprints like this. And if you have, this is census in Berlin main station, we have 299 collisions recorded in half a year period, and most were imprints of Ferry Pigeons. So one could have the impression of only Ferry Pigeons. So this is maybe not the most important place for bird conserving because it's not a native bird. But if you look to the dead birds, there were 33 dead birds which could be identified on species level. 18, so that means even more than 50% were feathers, but another almost 50% were protected bird species. So if you have many imprints of Ferry Pigeons, it is a good indicator that you also have many other birds. And the rate of the Ferry Pigeons depends just on the situation. We have this Potsdamer Platz, this large area of glass facades, where we found 30 dead birds, and only about 1/6 of them were Ferry Pigeons. Most were protected species. Just at the end of my talk, some results of these monitorings we did in Berlin in different areas. First, we started with lower buildings, zoological garden, a school, Then in 2018 we had this huge buildings. In high buildings we tried to get information about, and 2 years ago it was in the city center, main station, and some buildings around this. And what we find in total, we had more than 1,400 bird collisions. 257 we could identify on species levels. We had 36 species, and the top 5 were the robin, which is in this case were migrants. We have breeding robins, but they didn't collide much with glasses. Were mainly migrants, often attracted by light. Then this Ferry Pigeons, because we had 2 buildings where people were feeding Ferry Pigeons. So it's kind of an artifact. That's not normal, such a high proportion of them. Then with the song thrush, the next migrant bird. Then house sparrow, widespread resident in Berlin. And woodcock, it's number 5, the next migrant. Another finding was that what I already mentioned, small birds normally leave almost nothing on the paints. In 2 samples, we had one time we had only almost 20% of the small birds leaving something findable on the glass pane. In another sample, only 40% leave something. So most of the small bird collisions you wouldn't find if you don't find the corpse. And for that, you have to have a big effort. And another finding was that even very rare species, like we have here this ring ousel, which is a rare migrant in Berlin, but also quail, hoopoe, red-breasted flycatcher, which are rare migrants in the city. They collide with glass even in the city center, far from vegetation. That means migrants can occur everywhere. And also forest species like this middle-spotted woodpecker, wood warbler, or wintering redfalls, they fly against facades in the city center. Yeah, that means birds are very mobile, and you cannot just judge from where the building is situated, which kind of species will crash against it. The critical areas I already mentioned were this trees, mirrors in the facade. So the base of, even if you have a high building, the base is a very critical area. Then these glass, if you have glass on the top, like here, this can be very critical. The edges of buildings can be very critical. What we do not know exactly is what happens in this middle size above the tree line. From my own experience as a bird watcher for more than 45 years in Berlin, I would say there doesn't happen too much. There might be an exception if light is involved, because what Wolfgang said, artificial light attracts birds, and if you have a high degree of artificial light, birds might collide anywhere with the facade. Yeah, that was also one finding, that not only high buildings with light are problematic, but even low buildings like that, because migrants during the night, like song thrushes or robins in Berlin 2020, they have to rest some time. And obviously, if they go down to rest, they are still attracted by light. So the most light lit area of the facade, even from inside, the birds collided with the facade with the glass. So this is quite difficult to handle, because you have to to darken a building, even from inside to cover the light. It's a very difficult discussion with the architects, but you have to keep the light level as low as possible. And one thing which might at least be helpful for light outside the buildings, if you switch it off in the second half of the night, I think it would help a lot also for insects. So this is just a summary, what I already said, and yeah, now I'm finished.